Debbie Harris. I'm a member of Temple Beth Israel in Pomona, and I am here to welcome you to the Jewish Cooking Connection. Nice apron to help keep me clean. I will be demonstrating my gourmet brownies that everyone enjoys at the Friday night Shabbat Onegs. And I try to make different flavors so that people get different choices and they get to enjoy different things. Okay, let me introduce the ingredients. First thing, I use brownie mix, I use chocolate chips, I use eggs, oil, and water. And then I add other things in to make them fancy. Okay, so one of the things I do is I label my measuring cups when I'm adding flavors, and I draw a little map so I know which flavors go in which section. So first thing we'll do is we will add the egg into the my mixer. Years ago, a friend said, oh, just use a mixer instead of mixing it by hand, and boy, does that save a lot of time. So the trick is also just not over mixing. So I do the eggs and the oil, and I just use canola oil. So, and then I mix that up a little bit. Okay. Sorry for the noise. Okay, I just mix it a little bit. And then I'll just hook the beater on the edge of the bowl. Then I take my brownie mix and I massage it a little bit just to make sure there are no lumps in it, so that makes it handy. And then I pour it in. Okay. So then I stir it a little bit just to get it a little moist, and I add my water. So sometimes if you use 2 eggs, 2 large eggs, then it's more brown, it's chewy style. If you use 3 eggs, it's more cake-like. Personally, I like using 2 eggs, large eggs, or sometimes I use jumbo eggs. I usually use jumbo eggs. So I'll use 1 jumbo egg. But even with this, using 2, because I add so many other things to make the brownies chewy, it works out. So one of the things people talk about is, okay, so what I did was I mixed it enough that the powder, you don't see the powder anymore. And then I will mix this up. And I count to like no more than 20. Okay. Just enough to make it creamy. And then I'll get the brownie mix off the side. So it's all good. Okay, okay. Then what I need to do is take some brownie mix, and I'll just use one of these small bowls. Let me take this down. Okay. You can measure, but I just pour it in. And then I'll use a fork to straighten that out, to spread it out. So that way the Oreos have a nice brownie bottom. And I just eyeball having 4 sections. And when I first started doing this, I started by making brownies when I was in elementary school. And I loved the batter so much that I would eat the batter. So I had to make up for lost mass. So I started adding chocolate chips. Well, I found that when you add chocolate chips, that makes them moist. So this is what I've done. I've lined this with parchment paper, and then I've added just 1 section of brownie batter. And I do that for certain flavors. So like I do it for coffee, I do it for Oreo, and I do it for when I do hot fudge, because I put in a fudge sheet. So I just lay the cookies in, and I jog them so that, and then so I've got them. So you're pretty much covering the whole area. Put 1 more in there, and then I cut an Oreo in half so that it takes up the spaces, so then it completes the area, okay? Now I'm gonna add the cookie dough. You can buy pre-made cookie dough, or I make my own and lay it out in a sheet and then cut it into slabs like this. So I'm just gonna place this in the corner. Okay, so then I have 2 sections started, okay? Then the next section I'm going to be using, oh, now I need to add my chocolate chips. And my philosophy is if a little is good, a lot is better. So I'm adding a little over 2 cups of chocolate chips. And then just stir those in so that they're all mixed up and covered with brownie batter. Okay, and then this is what it looks like. So it's just brownie batter with chocolate chips. So if I was doing a regular chocolate chip brownie section, I would just pour those in. So one of the things I always talk about is I can't put the brownie batter on top of the Oreos yet because the Oreos would slide out. So I have to do my other sections around it. So I will pour some brownie batter in my salted caramel measuring cup. And that way I can add my flavoring, and it's about a cup or so. Because I'm doing a bottom layer and then I'm adding a layer of caramel, then I'm doing a top layer of brownie batter. Then my other flavor that I'm adding to is pecans. So I will add some brownie batter to that. And I don't need to add as much because I'll be adding pecans to add mass. Actually, for my salted caramel, I use a fork because I'm going to be using the fork later. When I add the caramel sauce on top, I'll use the fork to make the stripes. So I'm going to just do half of this, approximately half. So I always try to keep some brownie batter left in the bowl. So if I need to finish stuff on top, if there's not quite enough, then I can finish off the toppings. So to make sure everything's covered. Okay. Okay, so now this is my base. So I have the caramel ready to go, and I'm going to add a sheet of caramel. So one of the things I discovered, I happened to be walking through a store one day and I found these caramel sheets, and I thought, what a great idea. But what I found is when I used this sheet, it melted into the brownies and you couldn't see it. So I learned that if you take caramel, you melt it down just in a pan and then add baking chocolate, and then I put it in parchment paper and flatten it out, and then I just cut it to whatever I need. If it's too hard because you've added too much chocolate, just microwave it for a few seconds to soften it up and then cut it to the size you want. So now we have our caramel sheet in here, okay? So the other flavor, I have my pecans, and I'm gonna pour those in. And it's about a quarter cup of pecans. The other thing I like to do is add a little bit of flavoring. So if I'm using walnuts, I might use maple syrup. For the pecan, I use pecan. So, and you can get these at a candy supply store or baking supply store. And I just, about 1 dropper's worth. And I will stir that up. So, one of the things that I have found is you can't really overdo pecans, but you can overdo walnuts. So that'll overpower the brownie. So, but this works out just fine. So this is what it looks like. And I just pour it into this section now. I try to be aware of when people if they have allergies, I try to keep the nut sections on one side. So that way I can cut them separately and not pollute the rest of the brownie sheet. I put brownie batter on the Oreos and on the cookie dough. So, and that again, you're using about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup, but I will spread these out. And I still have some batter left over, so that way if I need to add more to one section, that's okay. See, I still have a little bit in here. So, okay, and I have my salted caramel cup, so I can add to the top of my salted caramel section. I can't hold it up yet because they're not spread out yet. Well, maybe I can, we'll see. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay, so this, I'm just gonna spread it out and even it all out. And then after I do that, then I will add the toppings, because I need to make sure that each section has a different look so people know which is which section. And then the other thing I do is I draw a map and I'll set it so that people can read and see what flavors there are, so they don't have to eat flavors they don't like. All right, now I'm going to put the toppings on, and I will start with the pecans. And what I do is for the pecans, I always roast them for about 10 minutes at 350 degrees, and then I chop them, put them in a bag, and throw them in the freezer. If you keep them in the freezer, they'll keep for a much longer period of time. So I just, look at my map. Okay, so I just sprinkle some pecans on top, so that way everybody knows this is the pecan section. The next section I'll do is chocolate chip cookie dough, and I saved a little bit of the slab of cookie dough, and I chopped, or I didn't chop, I sliced it into thin pieces. So I'm gonna use my knife and take that. I'm gonna turn my sheet so I can lay the cookie dough in stripes. And that way everybody knows this is the cookie dough section. And I do different flavors of cookie dough. Sometimes it falls apart a little bit, that's okay. Okay, the next section is Oreo, and I have crushed up Oreos. You can chop them with a knife, however you want to do it. I run it through my food processor, makes it really easy, and then I just sprinkle them on top. The last section will be salted caramel. Ooh, I forgot my salt. And I made my own caramel sauce, but you can buy caramel sauce at any store. And then I've heated it up a little bit so it's a little more liquidy, and I just pour stripes. Now I will finish the salted caramel section. I have some coarse kosher salt. And I like using the coarse salt because one, it makes it much more visible. So now we've got all 4 sections and they're very visible. You know which section goes where. I'm gonna put this in the oven. I set the timer, I set the oven for 350 degrees, and I will bake this. The box calls for like 28 minutes, but because I've added so much extra, it's probably closer to 32 minutes. Now, when you take it out of the oven, the salted caramel will look not finished, but especially it's in a glass pan, it will continue cooking. So just let it cool in the pan. It will continue cooking. It will solidify as it cools. So I really look at the other sections that don't have a lot of wet ingredients, like the Oreo or the cookie dough. I'll look at those, and if it's not jiggly or shiny, like it hasn't baked all the way, then I'll leave it in for another minute or 2. So I am ready to put it in the oven. Okay, after taking the brownies out of the oven, the pan will be hot, so you need to let them cool, and that usually takes a while. If you're in a really big hurry, you can take another bigger pan, put ice down, set these in to help cool them much faster. These are baked, these are cooled, so I keep everything in the parchment paper. You can see all 4 flavors, okay? And then I'm just gonna slide it out onto this cutting board. and then I will cut them. And I like to cut them into small bite-sized pieces so that way people can sample each of the 4 flavors or however many flavors, and that way they're only eating really one good-sized brownie. So, okay, and again, I'm gonna cut the pecan section last, so I'm gonna turn it around and cut these. Okay, so we have all 4 flavors, everything's cut, and I like them small so that way people can sample them. Okay, bon appetit, enjoy.
כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה גדלו וטובו מלא עולם דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדע בכבוד המרכבה זכות ומשור לפני חיסו חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו טובים מאוד שברא